Usually when we talk about learning a new skill or improving our lives, we treat it exactly like downloading an app on our phones.
Oh, 100%. We're totally obsessed with the apps.
Right. It's like you want to learn Spanish, you get the language app. You want to get better at coding, you download the programming app. You want to finally manage your time so you aren't just constantly stressed out. You install the calendar app and watch a quick tutorial. But, and here's the crazy part, we completely ignore the actual device we're trying to run them on.
The underlying hardware, the operating system.
Exactly. What happens when the phone's operating system itself is just, fundamentally glitchy? I mean, what happens when the battery drains in 10 minutes or the screen randomly freezes and the core processor is constantly overheating?
Well, then it doesn't really matter how incredible or how expensive those individual apps are, right? Because if the underlying system keeps crashing, you literally cannot run any of them.
Yeah, exactly. You can buy the absolute best running shoes in the world. You can download the perfect workout template and buy all the premium meal prep
Yeah,
consumer.
which we've all done, by the way.
Oh, absolutely guilty of that. But if the operating system in your mind cannot execute the simple command to, just get off the couch, none of it matters. So welcome to this deep dive, because today we are not looking at just another app. We are looking at the operating system.
We really are. We're diving into this incredible stack of research and synthesis that honestly completely dismantled how I personally view self-control.
Yeah, I want to do a deep dive into the subject of discipline today, because this is the meta skill required to acquire literally all other knowledge. It's what you need to achieve any meaningful goal you could ever set for yourself.
It's the foundation of everything else.
Right. And if you're listening to this right now, like maybe you're on your commute, maybe you're walking the dog, maybe you're at the gym, or maybe you're sitting at your desk actively avoiding a project you know you need to finish, this deep dive is for you.
It really is the ultimate operating system. Without it, all those other skills, all those brilliant intentions you have, all the promises you make to yourself on New Year's Eve or late at night when you're feeling super inspired.
And you're like, tomorrow I changed my life.
Exactly. Tomorrow I'm a new person. But without discipline, they just remain theoretical. They never actually materialize in the real world. And what's really fascinating here is how the source materials for our deep dive today, this comprehensive synthesis that's often referred to as the discipline problem, how it takes all these different, often totally contradictory philosophies of human behavior and weaves them together.
Yeah, into something incredibly practical. Because our mission today is to completely dismantle the popular and frankly highly toxic myths about what discipline actually is.
Yeah.
Because I know, when I used to hear the word, I just felt this mixture of guilt and total exhaustion.
Oh, sure. It sounds like punishment.
Right. But the core thesis we're exploring today is revolutionary. Discipline is not a personality trait that you are simply born with or without. It is not a mood. It is certainly not a dramatic burst of motivation. It is a trainable system of self-governance.
Yes.
It's this mechanism where a person learns to reliably do what matters, especially when impulse, comfort, distraction, and emotion are actively pulling the other way.
And the reason this specific synthesis of research is so powerful is that it bridges this massive gap in how we currently talk about self-improvement. Because, on one side you have the hard school of thought.
The drill sergeants?
Exactly. The intense ex-military thinkers, the stoics, the ultra-endurance athletes. These are the people who emphasize relentless internal standards, chosen hardship, extreme ownership of your failures.
Gritting your teeth through the pain.
Right. But then on the exact opposite side, you have the system school. These are the behavioral psychologists and habit researchers. They focus entirely on environmental design, reducing friction, and atomic level habit changes.
And usually the culture treats these two camps as totally opposed, right? Like you're either a grit your teeth warrior or you're a clever environmental designer.
Yeah, people think you have to choose one. But this deep dive reveals that durable, lifelong discipline actually requires both. It exposes the unglamorous but incredibly liberating mechanics of real self-mastery.
Okay, so let's unpack this, starting with what we are going to call the great myths of discipline. Because I think most of us, when we hear the word discipline, our brains just immediately generate this movie montage.
Oh yeah, the Rocky training sequence.
Exactly. We picture a guy waking up at 3 a.m., his alarm is blaring, he's gritting his teeth, taking a freezing cold shower in the pitch dark, and then literally yelling at himself in the mirror before running 10 miles in the sleet.
It's this picture of sheer internal violence.
Yes. A life lived under this permanent, harsh, unforgiving command.
And that is the first major misconception, and honestly, it is a really damaging one. The culture keeps misunderstanding discipline because, well, human beings are naturally drawn to spectacle. We like the before and after stories, the extreme transformations, the cinematic vein-popping effort.
It looks great on Instagram.
It really does. But the research makes it abundantly clear. Discipline is not a theatrical display of severity. It is not the same thing as suffering, and it is certainly not the same thing as punishment. When we confuse discipline with suffering, we assume that if we aren't miserable, we must not be disciplined. That is one extreme end of the false spectrum.
Which, I mean, that immediately sets us up for failure, right?
Yeah.
Because nobody can sustain absolute misery for a lifetime. But if that's one end of the spectrum, what's the other end?
The other end is the exact opposite error. It's the belief that discipline is an emotional high. It's the idea that discipline is what happens when your motivation is finally high enough. Like when you feel completely ready, inspired, or electrified by some brand new goal.
Oh, man. Waiting for the lightning bolt.
Waiting for the lightning bolt. People watch a motivational video at 2 a.m. They feel this massive surge of dopamine. They suddenly clean their entire house and they think, I am finally disciplined.
Yeah, I've been cured.
Exactly. But if you are waiting for an internal feeling of readiness to authorize your actions, you are not practicing discipline at all. You are just riding an emotional wave. So both of those pictures, the internal violence and the emotional high, are fundamentally incorrect.
Okay, so if it's not punishing yourself and it's not, waiting for a lightning bolt of inspiration, what is the actual definition? Let's get to the bedrock of what this operating system actually is.
The sources define it very carefully, and we need to look at each word here because every single word carries massive weight. The definition is dependable obedience to a chosen standard.
Dependable obedience to a chosen standard. Okay, let's break that down. Let's start with dependable. Because honestly, my discipline right now is highly undependable.
Well, dependable means it is not occasional. It is not something you merely visit on your best days. A person who acts wisely only when they feel strong, or only when the sun is shining, or only when the conditions in their life are absolutely perfect. Well, they aren't disciplined yet.
Right, because anyone can do the right thing when it's easy.
Exactly. A dramatic, heroic burst of effort can be admirable, sure. We all love pulling an all-nighter to finish a project we're passionate about, but discipline is something sterner, quieter, and much more profound than mere intensity. It is continuity.
Continuity over intensity. I like that.
It's regularity. It's about closing the gap between what you say matters and what you actually do, day after ordinary day. It is, to put it metaphorically, the Tuesday morning of virtues.
Wow. The Tuesday morning of virtues. Not the dramatic Sunday night epiphany, but what you actually do on a rainy, boring Tuesday morning.
Yeah.
Hey, what about the next word? Obedience. I have to admit, that word has some serious baggage for me.
It does for a lot of people.
Yeah, it sounds like submitting to a tyrant,
Right.
It sounds like losing your autonomy entirely.
It does trigger a lot of resistance in modern listeners. But in this specific context, it has a very different internal governing function. Obedience here means subordinating your immediate, localized impulse to your own prior long-term judgment.
Oh, okay, so I'm not obeying an outside flux.
No, you are obeying the standard you set for yourself when you are thinking clearly, rather than obeying the craving you feel in the moment of weakness. Like when your alarm goes off and you desperately want to sleep, obedience means the past version of you, the one who set the alarm because they wanted a healthier life, outranks the present version of you who just wants a warm blanket.
Which perfectly leads into the final part of the definition.
Yeah.
Chosen standard.
Right. Real discipline is never mere submission to external pressure. Think about it. A child can be controlled by a parent. A prisoner can be constrained by guards. An employee can be monitored into strict compliance by a micromanaging boss.
Yeah, but that's not discipline.
Exactly. That is just compliance. If the boss leaves the room and the employee instantly starts slacking off, there was zero discipline present. Discipline, in the fuller, mature sense, begins when the standard has been inwardly adopted. You have chosen it. It belongs to you.
And you hold yourself to it even when no one is watching, right? Even when there's no immediate consequence for failing.
Precisely. That's the hallmark of the chosen standard.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me, because the source material explicitly separates discipline from its close neighbors. These are words we use interchangeably in everyday conversation, but we absolutely shouldn't. So let's start with motivation.
Yes, motivation is a feeling state. It is an emotional and physiological reality. And look, it might help you begin an action, but feelings, by their very nature, fade.
They have to, right? You can't be hyped up 24/7.
Exactly. The human nervous system cannot sustain peak excitement indefinitely. Discipline is the capacity to continue the action when that motivation inevitably evaporates. This connects heavily to behavioral psychology. Action isn't produced by desire alone.
Right. Believing that discipline is just wanting it badly enough is a devastating trap. Because there will be days, lots of days, where you simply do not want it.
And if want is your only engine, you start moving.
Okay, but I have to push back a little here, or at least ask for some clarification. What about willpower? If discipline is not willpower, what is it? Because I always thought of them as the exact same thing. Is willpower just like the emergency brake on a car, while discipline is the actual steering wheel?
That is a brilliant analogy. Honestly, it captures the neurology of it perfectly. Willpower is the acute, intense exertion of inner force against a temptation that is right in front of your face.
So it's staring at the donut and squeezing your fist together to not eat it.
That's the emergency brake. And it matters, yes. You need an emergency brake in life, but pulling the emergency brake is exhausting. It causes intense friction, and it burns immense cognitive energy. You cannot drive a car to work by constantly yanking the emergency brake.
You'd burn out the brake pads in a week.
Exactly. Life is too long, and modern temptations are way too frequent to rely on raw willpower alone. A disciplined life, the steering wheel, actually reduces how often you even need to use willpower.
You steer away from the cliffs in the first place.
Yes. You create routines, rules, and physical environments that dramatically lower the number of daily internal battles you have to fight. The genuinely disciplined person isn't using willpower to resist the donut in the break room. They used discipline yesterday to make sure the donut isn't even in their house.
That makes so much sense. And then there's grit. I hear grit and discipline used as synonyms all the time, especially in like business and sports.
They strongly support each other, but they operate on completely different timelines. If we look at the psychological literature, grit is defined as passion and perseverance for very long-term goals.
Like over years or decades.
Right. It's about staying with the mountain, refusing to change careers when it gets hard, refusing to give up on a lifelong dream. Discipline, by contrast, operates at the micro level. It operates at the level of the very next action. Discipline says, do today's climb.
So you can be disciplined without being gritty.
Absolutely. You can actually be incredibly disciplined in your daily habits, waking up on time, eating well, answering emails, without having any noble long-term aim at all. Conversely, and tragically, you can care deeply about a long-term goal. You can have immense grit in theory and still fail daily because you lack the simple discipline to organize your morning schedule.
Wow. So grit is the compass pointing to the mountain, but discipline is just putting one foot in front of the other on the trail today. What about routine? Is discipline just having a good routine?
Routine is just the repeated structure of an action. Discipline is the internal capacity that keeps that structure in place when pressure is applied.
Oh, I see.
Routines are wonderful vehicles for discipline, but a routine can exist for shallow reasons. You might have a routine of going to the gym simply because your friends go or because it's easy right now. But what happens when you travel? What happens when you get stressed at work?
The routine collapses.
Exactly. Discipline is the moral backbone that sustains the behavior when the routine is inevitably disrupted.
There's one more neighbor the source material mentions, and I think this is the most dangerous one of all. Punishment. You touched on this earlier with the Rocky movie montage, but the text notes that many adults actually learned what they thought was discipline under the sign of shame.
Yeah, this is so common.
They were scolded, threatened, or literally humiliated into compliance as kids by parents or teachers.
And this does enormous psychological damage. Because they learn discipline through the mechanism of shame and fear as adults, they internalize the idea that self-discipline means being incredibly cruel and harsh to themselves. They confuse discipline with cruelty turned inward.
So if they fail, they just insult themselves.
Right. They think self-beratement is the engine of change. But self-hatred is a highly volatile, highly unstable fuel. It might produce a frantic burst of desperate change for a week, but it rarely, if ever, produces calm, stable continuity. True discipline is orderly fidelity to what you know is worth doing. It is an act of self-respect, not self-flagellation.
So let's tie a bow on this first major paradigm shift. Discipline isn't an emotion. It isn't punishing yourself. It isn't raw willpower burning out your engine. And it isn't just long-term grit. It's that quiet, dependable steering wheel. It is subordinating your impulses to your own chosen standard.
Beautifully summarized.
But, if it's just a steering wheel, a method of staying on the road, why do the thinkers in our source material treat it as a matter of absolute life and death? Why is this not just a productivity hack?
Because they speak about it with intense gravity.
They do, because most people come to the topic of discipline for practical, surface-level reasons. They want to stop procrastinating at work. They want to stop doom scrolling on TikTok until 2 a.m. They want to eat better. They want to get to the gym, which are all valid reasons.
Very valid. But if we stop there, we miss the true weight of the concept. The underlying argument in these texts is that the true weight of discipline is ontological and moral.
Okay, let's ground that word, ontological, meaning it affects the very nature of our being, our actual existence. Are you saying that, like, skipping the gym or hitting snooze actually changes who I am at my core?
Yes. Over time, it absolutely does, because a human life is cumulative. Our character isn't just made of 3 or 4 massive dramatic decisions like who we marry or what career we choose. Our lives are built from thousands and thousands of micro decisions, small repeated obediences and small repeated betrayals.
Right.
The physical body you inhabit, the depth of your attention span, the state of your finances, the trust others have in you, these are not accidents. They are shaped by the repetition of your daily governance.
And the texts point out a specific kind of internal suffering that comes from indiscipline. It's not just about failing to get a promotion or failing to fit into a pair of jeans. It's a deeper rot. It's about self-trust.
The loss of self-trust is devastating.
When you watch yourself repeatedly violate your own clear judgment, like you say you'll wake up at 6 and you hit snooze for an hour.
Right.
You say you won't drink on a weeknight and you have 3 beers. You say you'll work on your novel and you watch television instead. It actively destroys your trust in yourself.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it perfectly explains why certain extreme figures in the modern discipline movement resonate so deeply with millions of people. Beneath the harsh exterior and the yelling, they are making a profound moral claim about earned self-respect.
Like David Goggins or Jocko Willink.
Exactly. They argue that true confidence is not an emotion. It is not something you can get from standing in front of a mirror and saying positive affirmations. True confidence is evidence-based.
Evidence-based confidence. I love that.
If you repeatedly do what you say you will do, especially under strain, you gather undeniable physical and psychological evidence that you are a trustworthy person. If you constantly abandon your own standards, your subconscious mind knows it. No amount of self-esteem language will fix that internal rot. You literally cannot trust yourself. It's a crisis of being. You become a stranger to your own intentions.
I always liken indiscipline to identity theft, except you are the one stealing from your future self. You are robbing your future self of health, of wealth, of peace of mind, of a calm morning, all for the momentary comfort of 20 more minutes of sleep or a piece of junk food.
That's a great way to frame it.
So what does this all mean for the listener who just wants to get to the gym? How does understanding the ontological weight elevate that mundane goal of lifting weights or doing cardio?
It elevates it by shifting your focus entirely away from the physical outcome and placing it onto your identity as the agent of your own life. This is where Jocko Willink's famous military phrase, discipline equals freedom, really crystallizes.
Yeah, people love that quote, but I think they misunderstand it.
They completely misunderstand it. They think it means that being disciplined will feel like freedom in the moment. It absolutely doesn't. In the moment, it feels like a constraint. It feels like a boundary. It feels like saying no when saying yes would be incredibly easy and pleasurable.
Right, waking up at 5 a.m. does not feel like freedom.
Not at all. But the reality is that a person who can govern their sleep, their spending, their temper, and their dietary habits has usable, actual freedom in the world. The ungoverned person, the one who prides themselves on doing whatever they feel like in the moment, living purely by impulse, is not free at all.
They're a slave to their impulses.
Exactly. They are a slave to the tyranny of the last minute. They're constantly vulnerable to debt, to health crises, to emotional chaos, and to panic.
Because if you don't discipline your finances, your debt restricts your freedom to choose your career. If you don't discipline your health, your body restricts your freedom to travel or play with your kids. And the Stoic philosophy woven into these documents adds another layer to this, right?
Yes, the Stoic framing, like what Ryan Holiday writes about, rescues the concept of discipline from this highly modern, somewhat toxic language of optimization and productivity hacking.
Yeah, we aren't trying to become disciplined just to squeeze out 10% more output for our employers.
Exactly. In the Stoic framing, discipline is the fundamental moral ground for a good life. It frees us from enslavement to our basest appetites, our vanity, and our constantly shifting moods. A person ruled by sugar, by the need for praise, by sudden flashes of resentment, or by the ping of phone notifications might feel like they are being spontaneous and expressive, but they are actually highly manipulable by the outside world.
Wow. If a marketer can make you buy something instantly, or an algorithm can make you angry instantly, you are not free.
You are incredibly easy to control.
That is heavy. The disciplined person might look physically constrained from the outside. They go to bed early, they eat the same things, they stick to a schedule, but internally, they are unmanipulable. They are bulletproof. So to summarize the stakes, discipline operates on 3 levels simultaneously.
Precisely. It operates on the instrumental level. It literally helps you get things done and achieve goals. It operates on the structural level. It prevents your life from decaying under the weight of avoidable chaos and entropy. And finally, it operates on the ethical level. It is the daily process by which you forge yourself into a person fit to be trusted, both by others and by your own mind.
And discipline isn't just inefficiency or a character quirk. It is misrule. It is the lesser, momentary impulses overthrowing your better long-term judgment.
Exactly.
Okay, so if the stakes are this incredibly high, literally the integrity of our own identity and the desire to be disciplined is genuinely there, what exactly is actively destroying it every single day? Because if I ask someone why they failed their diet or why they haven't written their book, they usually just sigh and say, I guess I'm just lazy. But that feels way too simple. It feels like a cop-out.
Calling it laziness is an incredibly shallow, inaccurate diagnosis. The research argues that human beings are rarely destroyed by one massive, dramatic vice. Your life doesn't fall apart because you suddenly decided to be evil.
Right.
Instead, your discipline is eroded by a quiet, highly sophisticated coalition of smaller forces. There are 6 of them, to be exact, and they operate right under our radar.
Let's dive deep into these 6 enemies of discipline, because identifying them is half the battle. The first one is bargaining. I love this one. The texts call it the mind's inventive capacity to renegotiate a standard the very moment that standard becomes uncomfortable.
It's a profound insight from the harder school of discipline. The core problem isn't just that tasks are physically or mentally hard. The problem is that the human mind is endlessly, brilliantly inventive.
Too smart for our own good.
Right. When your alarm goes off at 5 a.m. for a run, your mind doesn't just bluntly say, I am lazy, I refuse to be good. That would be too obvious and your ego would reject it. Instead, your mind produces eloquent reasons, logical loopholes, and incredibly comforting redescriptions of your failure.
It rationalizes.
Exactly. It says, actually, muscle recovery is scientifically important, so rest is wisdom right now. It says, tomorrow is Monday. That's a much cleaner start for a new habit. It says, you worked 10 hours yesterday. You deserve a minor exemption.
Oh, man. It's like having a brilliant, Ivy League-educated inner lawyer whose only client is your immediate comfort. And that lawyer is incredibly persuasive. I can't tell you how many times my inner lawyer has convinced me that eating half a pizza is actually a strategic carb-loading decision for a workout I might do in 3 days.
We all have that lawyer.
But here's where I struggle, and where I think the listener might struggle too. How do I know when I actually need rest? Because burnout is real. How do I know the difference between genuine fatigue and my inner lawyer just bargaining to avoid work?
That is the exact edge where the first enemy bleeds into the second enemy. Self-deception. This is why figures like David Goggins insist on the concept of the accountability mirror.
Yeah.
Without brutal, unflinching self-honesty, you cannot govern your life. You will never know the difference between burnout and bargaining.
So how does the mirror work?
If you call your endless hours of scrolling YouTube research for my business, or you call your sheer avoidance of a difficult conversation waiting for the right time, or you call your fear of failure careful discernment, you are protecting your ego at the direct expense of your life. You have to strip away those protective narrations.
You have to call it what it is.
Yes, you have to look in the mirror and say, I am not resting because I am overtrained. I am resting because I am afraid of the cold. Until you shatter the self-deception, the inner lawyer will win every single case.
That is brutal, but necessary. Which brings us to the third enemy, convenience. And this one feels like a distinctly modern environmental problem, not just a psychological one.
It is entirely environmental. Human beings evolved to conserve energy, but modern environments are maliciously engineered to exploit that evolutionary trait. They are designed to make immediate satisfaction utterly frictionless while making delayed long-term goods highly difficult.
Like fast food.
Exactly. Food is scientifically optimized to hijack your appetite. Social media screens are engineered by thousands of the smartest people on Earth to induce behavioral compulsion. Buying things you don't need takes exactly one click, using money you can't even see.
So it's an uphill battle.
The average environment today contains a dense, weaponized concentration of anti-disciplinary incentives. You aren't necessarily morally weaker than your grandparents were a century ago. You are just living in an environment that is perfectly designed to undermine your self-control.
And this directly introduces Cal Newport's concept of deep work, which is heavily referenced in the synthesis. He argues that attention, not just physical action, is the primary modern battleground for discipline.
Yes. Newport points out a terrifying reality. If you cannot hold your attention on a hard, complex task for more than 10 minutes without fleeing to the distraction of your phone or your inbox, you have already lost the battle of self-government before any visible outward failure even occurs.
Attention is upstream of everything else.
If convenience dictates your focus, if you always click the brightest, easiest thing, your discipline is entirely compromised at the root.
That perfectly sets up the fourth enemy, identity drift. This happens when you view yourself, fundamentally, as just a chaotic person.
James Clear's work is vital here. He demonstrates that our habits are inextricably tied to our identity. If your internal self-concept is, I'm just bad with time, or I'm not a morning person, or I'm naturally a disorganized, creative type, then anytime you try to execute a disciplined act like using a planner or waking up early, it feels like a massive, exhausting, foreign performance.
Because you're acting against who you think you are.
It requires monumental strain because you are acting against your own perceived identity. You are secretly excusing your disorder by elevating it to a personality trait. As long as you identify as an undisciplined person, discipline will always feel like you are wearing a costume.
The fifth enemy might be the most counterintuitive, mind-blowing concept in the entire document: emotional indulgence. When most of us think of indiscipline, we think of indulging in pleasure like eating a whole cake or buying an expensive watch. But the research says discipline is equally threatened by the pleasure of certain negative emotions.
This is a revolutionary realization for most people. We often secretly enjoy the dark pleasure of resentment, self-pity, outrage, or feeling morally superior to others.
Wait, what? Why would we enjoy feeling bad?
Because those specific emotional states relieve us of the heavy responsibility to take action. Think about it. If you are deeply resentful about how your boss treats you, you get to sit at your desk and feel wronged, which is much easier than taking the terrifying action of confronting them or finding a new job.
Oh, wow.
If you are drowning in self-pity about your health, you get to feel burdened by the universe instead of doing the hard work of building physical capacity. Feeling wronged is a psychological indulgence that actively destroys your self-command.
That makes total sense, but it's so uncomfortable to admit.
As the Stoics point out, a central task of discipline is realizing that not every emotional impulse you feel deserves political rights inside the republic of your mind.
Not every emotional impulse deserves political rights inside your mind. I want everyone listening to just pause and let that sink in. You do not have to vote yes on every feeling of anger or self-pity that arises. You can veto them. That is powerful. And finally, the sixth enemy, scale.
Scale is the classic trap of attempting a massive overnight overhaul of your life that your current psychological and physical structure simply cannot support. It is confusing your emotional sincerity with your actual capacity.
Like the Sunday night motivation surge we talked about.
Yes. You feel terrible on a Sunday night, so you promise that starting Monday, you will wake up at 4 a.m., run 10 miles, meditate for an hour, delete all social media, and eat only raw vegetables.
And then you collapse under the weight of it by Tuesday afternoon.
Exactly. And the tragedy is you then interpret that collapse as permanent evidence that you simply lack the discipline gene. In reality, you aren't fundamentally flawed. You just attempted an architectural project way too large for the machinery you currently possess. You tried to build a skyscraper on a swamp.
Okay, so knowing these six enemies, the inner lawyer of bargaining, the lies of self-deception, the frictionless trap of convenience, the excuse of identity drift, the toxic comfort of emotional indulgence, and the crushing weight of scale, that is half the battle. But it isn't enough to just know they exist. You need a system that neutralizes the inner lawyer and the modern environment at the same exact time.
You need a framework.
Which brings us to the core mechanics. We need to talk about the two engines of discipline.
The source synthesis does something brilliant here. It outlines two fundamentally bad, incomplete theories of discipline that dominate our current culture, and then it merges them. The first is what we can call the internalist theory. This camp says discipline is purely a matter of the soul and the will. If you fail, it's because you aren't tough enough, you aren't hungry enough, or you aren't honest enough. Failure is entirely a moral softness.
That's the extreme interpretation of guys like David Goggins and Jocko Willink. Just stare at the wall and suffer.
Right. And the second bad theory is the extreme systems thinker theory. This camp says discipline has nothing to do with willpower or character. It is entirely about environmental design. Just optimize your environment, reduce friction, automate your decisions, use app blockers, and the desired behavior will magically, effortlessly follow.
And if you fail, it's not your fault. It's just a design error in your environment. That's the extreme interpretation of the B.J. Fogg and James Clear camp. So who is actually right?
The profound synthesis of this material is that both camps are partially right, but totally insufficient on their own. To build a genuinely disciplined life, you need both engines running simultaneously. The internalists are absolutely right that you must have a non-negotiable standard.
Because if you don't care, you'll just bypass the system.
Exactly. If you don't have an inward burning allegiance to something higher than your own immediate comfort, then your comfort will always win eventually, no matter how good your app blockers are. You will just delete the app blocker. Without a moral and personal standard, systems are just sterile, soulless optimization lacking any real gravity.
But I imagine the systems thinkers are right too. Because if you only rely on raw standards, if I just stare in the mirror and yell at myself to be a better person, but I keep junk food in my pantry and sleep with my phone on my pillow, I am going to fail.
You will inevitably fail. Without environmental design, high standards lead to repeated, exhausting, noble failures. Because you are relying purely on raw willpower. You are constantly asking yourself to make the hard, noble choice in an environment perfectly designed to make the easy, toxic choice irresistible.
It's setting yourself up.
Behavioral psychologist B.J. Fogg's model is crucial here. He maps behavior on a graph, showing that behavior only happens when three things converge at the same moment: motivation, ability, and a prompt. If the ability required to do something is very hard, you need massive motivation to do it. And motivation, as we discussed, is totally unreliable.
Let me try an analogy here to see if I'm grasping how these two engines work together. I think of it like building a riverbank.
Okay, let's hear it.
Engine 1, the internal standard, the identity, is deciding where the river needs to flow. You have to have a destination. You have to say, I am a person who values health, or I am a person who finishes their work. That's the standard.
Yeah.
But engine 2, the environment and procedure, is grabbing a shovel and digging the actual physical trench so the water naturally, effortlessly flows in that direction.
I like that.
Because if you just yell at the water to flow a certain way using only your standards, it'll just flood everywhere.
Yeah.
But if you dig a trench without knowing where you actually want it to go, you just have a meaningless ditch.
That is a perfect clarifying analogy. Discipline always starts as conscious governance engine 1. You set the rule. You make the hard choice. But it must rapidly mature into infrastructure engine 2. You have to install forms of life, physical barriers, and automated routines that stop placing you in constant proximity to the temptations that unravel you.
So you don't have to fight yourself every day.
You build routines that decide the outcome before the inner lawyer can even wake up and begin the argument.
Okay, so we have the blueprint. We know the enemies we're fighting, and we know we need both engines, the internal standard and the external trench. Now, how do we actually pour the concrete? How does a normal, flawed, tired person actually begin this process without triggering the enemy of scale and collapsing by Tuesday? Let's get into the mechanics of starting and stabilizing. And the first rule here is really going to hurt some egos.
It absolutely will, because the foundational rule of behavior change is discipline almost always begins smaller than your ego wants it to.
Why? Why does the ego hate starting small? If I want to be a runner, why does my ego reject the idea of running for 5 minutes?
Because human ambition prefers dramatic, cinematic beginnings. When we finally become disgusted with our indiscipline and decide to change, we want our immediate actions to match the massive intensity of our desire. We want to feel like a hero immediately, so we design heroic routines.
Right, the 10-mile run on day 1.
But let's look back at Fogg's behavior model. When a behavior is highly difficult, like running 10 miles when you haven't run in a year, it requires peak 10 out of 10 motivation to execute. But motivation is an emotion, and it naturally fluctuates. So the very moment you have an ordinary, low-energy day, a 4 out of 10 motivation day, that heroic routine collapses and you are back to 0.
So my ego wants me to walk into the gym and lift 300 pounds on day 1, take a selfie, and post a profound quote about it so everyone knows I'm changing. But actual structural discipline is lifting 10 pounds every single day in silence.
Exactly. This is where James Clear's concept of identity votes is structurally crucial. You do not become a disciplined person by crushing one perfect 12-hour productivity marathon on a Sunday. You become disciplined by casting repeated, undeniable, incredibly small votes for a new identity.
Consistency over intensity.
A small, kept promise builds the psychological architecture of discipline infinitely better than a massive, broken promise. The paradox that the ego hates is that starting small isn't softness. It is cold realism in service of permanence.
The text also draws a hard line between having specific rules versus vague wishes. I want to read more books. It's just a vague fog of good intentions. But I will read 10 pages of a book before I'm allowed to turn on a screen at night.
Yeah.
Is an actual load-bearing structure.
Yes. Discipline begins to physically exist in the world only when a vaguely desired self is translated into a visible rule attached to a specific place or a specific time, and it requires repetition and the management of friction. Repetition isn't just mechanical, it's constitutional. Doing it over and over teaches your physical body how to carry the act, and it teaches your subconscious self what kind of person you actually are.
But wait, I have to challenge this. If we are constantly smoothing out the friction and making it incredibly easy to start, if I'm only lifting 10 pounds or reading 2 pages, is there a danger that we make things too easy and we never actually grow? I mean, my ego might be satisfied lifting 10 pounds forever, but my muscles won't get any stronger. We can't avoid hard work forever, right?
That is a vital distinction, and it raises an important question about the difference between a childish approach and an adult approach to self-command.
Okay, tell me the difference.
The childish approach to discipline asks the self to win a gladiatorial battle against fully weaponized temptation in the moment. It places a chocolate cake on the desk and stares at it, trying to use willpower to not eat it.
Sounds exhausting.
The adult approach changes the friction. It doesn't bring the cake into the house. But you are absolutely right to ask about growth and exertion. Making the start frictionless doesn't mean the activity remains easy forever. And that leads directly to the question of sequence.
Sequence. What does sequence mean in the context of building discipline?
It means you cannot impose advanced high-level discipline on a disordered, chaotic base. People try to implement 3 hours of intense Newport-style deep work or a brutal physical training regimen while their sleep is a wreck, their diet is garbage, and their digital life is in total unregulated chaos.
You have to lay the foundation.
You have to order the base first. You fix the sleep, you fix the environment, then you escalate the difficulty.
Which perfectly bridges us into the next critical area, the role of hardship and the battle for attention. Because if we are making our environments frictionless to build the habit, where does hard work, suffering, and discomfort actually fit into a disciplined life?
The contemporary conversation is violently split into 2 camps here. The comfort camp emphasizes gentleness, sustainability, and environmental design, correctly pointing out that shaming yourself into impossible, painful programs usually leads to burnout and regression.
Right.
But the hardness camp points out, equally correctly, that modern life has made avoidance far too easy. And as a species, we have lost our psychological tolerance for even moderate discomfort. If we never face hardship, we become incredibly fragile.
So how does the research synthesize them? Let's bring Goggins back in, because he is the patron saint of hardship.
Goggins is often misunderstood as just the guy who likes pain. But structurally, he is best understood as a philosopher of anti-avoidance. His deepest point isn't that every human must run ultramarathons until their feet bleed. His point is that the self most people currently obey is overprotected, overly coddled, and comfort trained.
We tap out too early.
It views any difficulty, a moment of boredom, a slight physical fatigue, a moment of intellectual uncertainty, as a complete veto. It says, "This is hard, therefore I must stop." Chosen hardship corrects this glitch in the operating system. It teaches your organism, on a cellular level, that discomfort is survivable and not a mandate to quit. It expands the physical and mental zone of what is possible for you.
That makes total sense. I relate this to physical training. You don't do a grueling, heavy lifting workout just for the pure sake of hurting yourself. You do it so that when you have to carry heavy groceries up 3 flights of stairs, or when you have to handle a highly stressful 12-hour workday, it feels incredibly light by comparison. You raise your baseline of tolerance.
That is exactly it. You are expanding your capacity. But Ryan Holiday and the Stoics offer a vital, necessary correction to the hardness camp here. Discipline is not a cult of pain. Hardship without orientation or purpose is just an ordeal. Difficulty should not become ego theater.
Ego theater. I love that phrase. Let's unpack that. What does that look like?
Ego theater is when people take up extreme, highly visible, painful practices, like taking ice baths on Instagram or doing absurd physical challenges, not to build a quietly disciplined life, but to feel special and superior.
That's performative.
They use their chosen suffering as moral camouflage while completely neglecting their actual, ordinary, boring duties. They run 50 miles, they are chronically impatient with their kids, they don't get enough sleep, and they can't regulate their temper when someone cuts them off in traffic.
Wow, that hits hard.
True discipline doesn't seek pain indiscriminately for applause. It chooses specific discomforts that serve a higher integrated value.
And the text makes a fascinating argument that the most consequential, difficult hardship in the modern world isn't physical at all. It's not about running miles or lifting weights. It's cognitive. The great modern hardship is attention.
This cannot be overstated. Attention is upstream of your entire life. If you cannot hold your focus, you cannot build a business, you cannot understand a complex book, you cannot create art, and you cannot deeply connect with your partner.
We're constantly distracted.
Digital environments have fundamentally rewired us. They have converted normal human boredom, the act of waiting in line, and the frustration of difficult work into immediate prompts to flee. Every time your work gets slightly hard, there is a brightly colored escape hatch sitting right in your pocket.
Fleeing to a screen every single time you feel a tiny bit of friction or boredom literally trains the mind away from endurance. It trains you to be fragile.
Exactly. Cal Newport and Ryan Holiday intersect perfectly here. Newport says you must actively, fiercely create physical and digital conditions for serious concentration. Holiday says you must philosophically refuse to be tossed around by every impression and ping, refusing to let every shifting mood or moment of boredom seek immediate digital anesthesia is the ultimate, most difficult modern form of self-government.
But what happens when we drop the ball? What happens when our carefully designed system, our identity votes, our trench, and our cognitive grit all fail us? Because let's be real, they will. We are human, and the operating system is going to crash occasionally. That brings us to one of the most important parts of this deep dive, the art of resumption, or failure without melodrama.
The absolute most destructive myth about disciplined people is the illusion that they never ever lapse. This myth turns every single inevitable failure into a massive existential crisis of identity.
We make a huge deal out of one mistake.
If you think true discipline means a perfect, unbroken, infinite streak, then one missed workout or one day where you eat junk food feels like a dark revelation. You say to yourself, oh, the streak is broken. This is who I really am. I'm a fraud. I'm a failure.
And that catastrophic thinking inevitably leads to shame. And shame, as we established earlier, completely destroys discipline.
It obliterates it. The cycle is tragic. A person fails slightly. They interpret that minor failure as absolute proof of their own hypocrisy. They feel immense, crushing shame. And then, because human beings cannot tolerate prolonged shame, they seek comfort and relief from that shame by returning to the very bad habit that caused it in the first place. The original lapse was incredibly small, a tiny detour, but the shame spiral makes it catastrophic.
Okay, let's unpack this with a really grounded analogy. Allowing a lapse to become a shame spiral is exactly like getting a flat tire on the highway. Getting a flat tire, a lapse in your discipline, is a bummer. It delays you. But getting out of the car, looking at the flat tire, feeling ashamed of your driving, and then taking a hunting knife and violently slashing your other 3 perfectly good tires because you're so mad about the first one, that is a shame spiral.
That is brilliant.
It's utterly foolish. And yet we do it all the time with diets. You eat one cookie, and instead of stopping, you say, well, the day is ruined, I might as well eat the entire box.
That is a perfect, visceral analogy. Slashing the other 3 tires is the ultimate undisciplined act, disguised as self-anger. So what is the right response when you get the flat tire? The research says it is neither childish softness like saying, oh, well, it doesn't matter, nor theatrical, self-hating disgust. It is accurate accounting.
The accountability mirrors again.
Here, Goggins' accountability mirror is applied cleanly and surgically. Tell the literal truth. Don't romanticize the lapse, but don't inflate it into metaphysical doom either. Name it, understand exactly why it happened, and resume the standard.
And James Clear's concept of statistical habit tracking helps pull the emotion out of it too, right?
Yes, profoundly. Clear trains us to treat habits statistically, not mythically. If you work out 28 days out of 30, statistically, you are a highly disciplined athlete. The 2 missed days are statistically irrelevant. What matters is the trajectory over a long timeline. The disciplined person fiercely protects the next rep. They understand that starting again quickly and quietly without demanding a parade or throwing a tantrum is the main art of self-command.
Jocko Willink's concept of extreme ownership applies perfectly here, too. When you fail, refuse to outsource the causality. Don't say, my boss stressed me out, so I was forced to eat the donut. Take complete ownership. Say, I chose to eat the donuts.
But simultaneously refuse self-condemnation. Just ask the cold, practical questions. Was the standard too vague? Was the prompt missing? Was I overly fatigued because I slept poorly? Fix the system, patch the tire, and resume driving.
The profound emotional shift required here is to stop treating every single lapse as a high-stakes referendum on whether you are fake or real. Those are just vanity questions generated by the ego. The disciplined person starts again before it feels inspiring or pure again. Angela Duckworth's concept of grit is essentially about this exact moment, the ability to absorb imperfection and failure without quitting the overall enterprise.
Exactly right.
We have built the complete framework now. We know the 6 enemies. We know the 2 engines of internal standards and external systems. We know how to start small to bypass the ego. We know the role of chosen hardship, and we know how to bounce back from the inevitable flat tire without slashing the other 3. Now let's look at what this actually looks like when we plug it into the messy, complicated socket of daily life. Let's talk about enactment.
The source material is fantastic at translating all this high-level theory into the lived practice of specific domains. Let's start with mornings.
Okay, let's hear it.
The issue here isn't clock worship. You don't magically become a morally superior, disciplined person just because you wake at 4 a.m. instead of 6:30 a.m. The issue is sequence and authority. Does the day begin by your conscious decision, or does it begin by ambient appetite? Is the glowing screen of your phone the first authority you consult, letting the world's emergencies hijack your brain, or do you have a chosen, protected sequence to start your day?
What about the domain of work? Because that's a huge one.
Work discipline is fundamentally about protecting your attention before urgency escalates into panic. It's Newport's deep work applied. It means refusing the sweet seduction of pseudo-work, answering easy emails to feel productive, and having the discipline to stare at the difficult, high-value task until it yields.
And food. Because that's where most people feel their discipline failing.
Food discipline is the ultimate test of Engine 2 environmental design. It means changing your shopping patterns in the grocery store so that your clear, long-term judgment, rather than your 9:00 p.m. exhausted appetite, holds the veto power. You use environmental friction. If the junk food isn't in the pantry, you don't have to fight an exhausting moral battle every single night.
Okay, here is a domain mentioned in the text that absolutely blew my mind, because I had never thought of it as a discipline issue. Speech. The research calls it an incredibly underrated domain of self-governance.
It is entirely overlooked. Many people who are incredibly disciplined in the gym, they count every macro, they lift heavy weights, are completely, wildly undisciplined with their tongue. Speech discipline means not saying every single thing you feel at the exact temperature you feel it. It means refusing to disguise emotional dumping, office gossip, or impulsive, angry reactions as just being authentic. Self-government absolutely includes language.
It's mind-blowing to think that keeping your mouth shut when you're deeply irritated with a coworker or a spouse is literally the exact same mental muscle as waking up at 5 a.m. to go for a run in the cold. It is subordinating a fiery, immediate impulse to a prior, higher standard of who you want to be. I love that.
Exactly. And then there is your digital life. Deciding where the phone sleeps at night, deciding which notifications actually deserve to interrupt your life. And finally, relationships. Having the discipline to regulate your own irritation, the discipline to apologize promptly rather than letting pride win, and the discipline to do the boring, unglamorous maintenance that keeps trust alive, instead of spending 100% of your energy at work and giving your loved ones only your exhausted, depleted leftovers.
The unifying principle across all these messy domains is, wherever your life is naturally grifting, make the rules visible. Stop relying on vague intentions. Vagueness is indiscipline's favorite hiding place.
And that leads to the ultimate, beautiful conclusion of the source material, the mature form of discipline. When you first begin this journey, discipline feels like an intense opposition. It feels like a war. It's you fighting yourself. It's exhausting. But as you stay with it, discipline matures into integration.
So it gets easier.
The standards become internalized. You don't just aggressively force yourself to act well anymore. You increasingly want the order that you once had to artificially impose.
It stops feeling like an alien, uncomfortable costume you put on every morning, and it actually starts feeling like your true character.
Yes. And the hallmark of this mature form is that it is not grim. A grim, rigid person might be highly controlled, but they are usually using their discipline as identity armor or as a way to feel superior to everyone else. That is not maturity. That is just a more highly organized ego. Mature discipline is calm. It is profoundly untheatrical. It results in what the Stoics call ordered freedom. Because you have handled your baseline duties, you are less frantic, less self-obsessed, and therefore vastly more available for real work, real duty, and real love.
So as we wrap up this massive foundational deep dive into the ultimate operating system, let's summarize the marching orders. Discipline isn't a magical genetic gift you are born with, and it isn't the act of hating yourself into compliance. It is the trained, cultivated ability to keep faith with what actually matters to you. It is built by starting much, much smaller than your ego wants, by aggressively removing the friction for good habits, by fully expecting failure to happen, by dropping the theatrical shame and the tire flashing what it does, and by resuming your path quickly and quietly. To you, the listener, most of us do not actually need a more exciting, more cinematic vision of life. We do not need another app. We just need a more governable self. So right now, today, pick one domain, just one. Don't trigger the enemy of scale where your life is drifting. Make a concrete, visible, tiny rule, and cast your first small vote for your new identity today.
That is the perfect summary. But I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative puzzle to mull over. Something not explicitly solved in the text, but heavily implied by everything we've discussed today. We've talked entirely about how discipline orders your life, removes chaos, and brings peace. But consider this. As your discipline matures and you actually become this highly integrated, dependable, unshakable person, what happens to the parts of your personality that used to secretly thrive on the adrenaline of last-minute chaos? How do you redefine what excitement means when your life is no longer just a series of self-authored emergencies?
Wow. Because if the operating system is finally running smoothly and you aren't procrastinating anymore, you don't get the rush of fixing a terrifying crash at the last second. You just have to do the quiet work of building.
Exactly. It changes what you find thrilling.
Something profound to think about. Until next time.